Good evening, Trinidad and Tobago. Welcome to One on One. I'm Nirad Tewarie. Tonight I'm joined by Emancipation Support Committee Chairman Khafra Kambon. Welcome, Mr. Kambon.
Thank you.
Sorry we couldn't have you in the run-up to the Emancipation
Yes,
celebrations, but
it was tough.
any day is a good day.
Yes, all right.
So tell me, are you satisfied with the way things went this year and where we've gotten to in terms of our celebration, in terms of our consciousness and so on?
Yes, I think that all our activities, just about everything went quite well from the very opening bell. Because on May 25th, which is African Liberation Day, that's when we launched our program. And we usually don't publicize that or do anything. And, we just do it as a sort of event, that meant to be more a media event to see that we've started. And we were quite surprised that we filled the hall. We went in, the audience that came out, because we didn't work towards that kind of thing. And so we saw there was a certain spirit to the emancipation from then. And the launch of our lecture series, which is really the beginning of activity, since there's such a focus with us on education, that was exceptionally good. We went to the town hall, the city hall in Port of Spain, and couldn't hold people. Some people had to turn back because they couldn't get in and couldn't hear from outside of the hall. And from then on, everything has gone very well, right up to Emancipation Day itself, which, of course, was a high point. For the first time, we had the president of an African country actually participating on Emancipation Day itself. In 1997, President Rawlings was here, but he'd really gone to spend Emancipation in Jamaica and came here afterwards. So we had to hold open the Emancipation Village to host him properly. But this time, you had a president who came specifically to be here with us on Emancipation Day.
And that's interesting, isn't it? Because it seemed like President Obasanjo was taken aback by what he saw and how involved the community is and the amount of participation and the level of display and consciousness and so on. He even said so much as he wants to take it back and start celebrating in tandem with us.
Yes. And it's the same thing. And that's what happened with President Rawlings of Ghana's experience in Jamaica. And that year, Jamaica did things in a very big way. And then coming and experiencing what he experienced in Trinidad and Tobago, he actually went back and started it in Ghana from 1998. And it still goes on. It's not as, the focus on it is not as great since the change of government in Ghana, but it's still there as part of the Panafest now. And now you have another African country. The president is impacted by what he has seen here. And we expect two things to happen. One, for there to be a commemoration now in Nigeria. And the other thing is for recognition at the African Union that this would be a global day of commemoration. I'm certain that's going to come up at the African Union. Last year there was a African Union diaspora workshop here in Trinidad and Tobago in May. And one of the recommendations of that was to put forward to the African Union the question of that recognition of Emancipation Day. Now it will have the support, apart from coming from a workshop in Trinidad and Tobago, albeit attended by African Union officials and all that, but now it's going to come not from this workshop only, but it's also going to come from the top, because President Obasanjo is currently the chairperson of the African Union. And even when his office comes to an end, which will be fairly soon, because it's going to be it's a rotating chairmanship, he would still be one of the most influential figures on the continent of Africa. So,
well,
so that's
certainly
he's
seen as one of the elders, huh?
Yes. Yes. So we know that that is going to be major recognition. We really have a gold mine on our hands here with the Emancipation commemoration. You look at the impact it has had on President Obasanjo, with which we are very, very pleased, and he was extremely pleased.
Of course.
And he's a natural person. You get spontaneous responses to things. And I'll tell you, we went to we moved from the grandstand area where he made his formal address, and we went over to what we consider the expo and marketplace. And he moved around to the stalls, and the way he was greeted, you have one of the booths was Nigeria.
Yes.
And I mean, he had a fantastic impromptu thing with him singing and all that. But when he came out, he went to the drummers and he started to beat a drum. When he came out of the grandstand, then he goes to the Nigerian store, he stops here and there. And the crowd is responding to him as he's walking through the marketplace, and he decides, I'm going to go up on the stage. And he goes up on the stage and he says, I want to dance. And it's that kind of, he knows how to relate to people, how to interact with people. But the point I'm making, despite the digression, is that you look at the impact on him, you look at the impact on his entourage. I spoke to some of them afterwards, other members spoke to others of them and so on. And they are seeing something here as a very unique and special kind of experience. And it is something which would draw people to Trinidad and Tobago and bring economic benefits. The hotel sector,
sure. Well,
the tourism sector,
TIDCO, when it was TIDCO, now the Tourism Promotion Company or Tourism Promotion Agency or whatever it's called now, TDC, I think, has listed as one of its areas of focus for tourism as cultural tourism.
Yeah.
And in that they include the festivals we have and the celebrations we have and so on. But what about local tourism? I mean, how can we as a society, we hear all our leaders, whether they be political or in NGOs and so on, talking about ways to bridge the gaps between the races or among the races and so on. How can we make things like how can we get other communities to visit the Emancipation Village or the Tewarie Nagar site or the whatever exhibition or expo that we may have? What are the ways that we can use these things? As you say, they really are gold mines, each one in and of itself, in different ways. How can we use them to help bring our country together, or can we not?
Okay, well, it's two things here. When I spoke about gold mine, I was looking at a financial thing.
Sure.
In the sense of getting visitors to come to Trinidad and Tobago. Right now, but socially, it could be a gold mine as well. And I know that has a financial aspect of it as well.
Not to interrupt
but
you,
I think we're looking at it socially.
If you have one group, or predominantly one group visiting any one of these events, you have X amount of dollars. If you have other groups coming, you have X plus whatever,
that's right? Yes, so it has a financial benefit as well. So we're looking at the internal, the financial, as well as the social aspect of it. And it is something that we really have to work towards, because people have to learn to appreciate each other's cultural expressions, the things that have deep emotional meaning to each other. If I cannot appreciate what the neighbors with whom I live do, then it's difficult for my society to move forward. And certainly, I look at what's happening now, and I think that in our festivals, I think I'm seeing a more of a tendency towards polarization. The Emancipation Village is an environment in which everyone is made to feel comfortable. And I was seeing a tendency towards more participation. This year, I think I observed less participation by say, in the Indian community. I saw less participation this year than in the past. Even though among our volunteers, we had more Indians among our volunteers this year who did hard work for the village. But in terms of the mass participation, I saw less, and that is not a good sign.
Why is that, do you think?
I think it has to do with the politics of the day. We have a politics that is moving people away from each other, and somehow the leadership on either side has not been able to find ways to bridge the gap. And sometimes people do things which further the division. Sometimes even when they are trying to bridge the gap, because it has to be based on an understanding. To me, the mechanism for bringing people together is not a pretense that there's no difference. It is a acceptance of acceptable difference. And people with different historical, cultural backgrounds respond to things differently, have different things that have deep psychological meanings to them. And that has to be appreciated. And we have to learn to appreciate each other for who we are and what we are. Now, I am the chairperson of the Emancipation Support Committee, which is essentially formed by bringing a group of African-oriented organizations together. But for many years, I celebrated Diwali at my home because I had, there was an Indian lady who lived with me, very devout Hindu, and she was an older person. She's passed on now. But, you know, we had a Diwali celebration with all the rituals of India and everything that were part of it. And my African friends would come. Her Indian family and friends would come. And it was natural. This was nothing, anything that was artificial or contrived. And that's the thing, wasn't be contrived. So I didn't have to introduce and say, bring my partners who drum in to do some African drumming so that Africans could feel comfortable. No, this was about something that was Indian. And you are coming to my home to appreciate something that is Indian. And because it was natural, everybody felt comfortable and interacted. Some people feel that you have to artificially force things together and pretend that, okay, this is emancipation, but it's just equal all through the society. You know, and you don't have to do that. Let things develop naturally. Let the bonds develop naturally. Put things in a context where they are appropriate, you know, and preach a philosophy to the society of learning to accept difference.
But you say the politics is what you think is pushing the various ethnic groups further and further apart, or at least further apart than they were last year or the year before that. Well,
I don't think it's that. You see, what has happened there, you've had a change in the political configuration in this country that goes back to when the UNC first assumed power, late 95 was the election, yes. Okay, because before that, what happened is that there was a feeling in the society that because of the demographics, that there was an assumption that an African-dominated party would always win the election. And a change was taking place, and people didn't even recognize the significance of that demographic change. It wasn't quite recognized until 1995, that you felt a real challenge to political office by an Indian-dominated party. And actually, well, what was like a tie, but it became a success for the Indian-dominated party. Now, that had some psychological impacts on both sides, because Africans felt, well, we were not strong in the economy of the country. There's backward movement in many areas where the African community is concerned. And the political office, even though we can't say it was used specifically in African interest, but it was like a psychological prop in a society where there was a growing alienation as though you're not properly represented in any critical sectors in the society. And the removal of that prop had its impacts on how people felt about their sense in the society, and it was somewhat traumatic for a lot of people. On the other hand, you've had the preaching to the Indian community that there's so much racism of the African politicians that are being deliberately excluding Indians, discriminating, and that kind of thing, you know, which was a heavy propaganda. But you don't have to have too much fact to make something stick when it's emotional and emotive. And therefore, there was a feeling in the Indian community that, okay, we finally achieved power and it's Indian time now. In fact, the phrase is Indian time now became part of the political discourse. And there were certain patterns of behavior that went with it, which further caused an alienation between the groups. So you had a trauma on one side. You had a feeling of triumph against what was always sold to the community as discrimination on the other hand. That created a polarization then. And now the contest for electoral power has become more intense because there's a possibility that either party can win. It is no longer clear that African-dominated party will win. It's going to be close. So even if somebody wins 5 seats more than the other one, the margins are going to be so close to the marginals that you always have that level of uncertainty. And in that now, the contestation for what is perceived to be power has become more real, and we have not adjusted as a society to that. And we need leadership that gives us the capacity to adjust to that and make people feel comfortable, so that no matter what the outcome, no matter what party you support and what the outcome, you feel it is something that you can live with. So, and that's very difficult to achieve.
Sure. But do you think that in the meantime, what you see happening with the, I guess, the ethnicity of visitors to things like the village, the Emancipation Village, or the Tewarie Nagar, or any other cultural event, will continue to, these events will mainly be patronized by one ethnic group or the ethnic group with which the event is associated because of that political division or that feeling, as you say, of alienation by one or the other?
Well, I think to some extent, but I feel it can be overcome.
Even without a political change?
Even without the political change, it could be overcome to some extent. Now you're going to have the group dominating. I mean, emancipation, what it means to me emotionally, spiritually, and everything, I don't expect it to have the same meaning to a non-African. So we are looking at different things, and therefore it is automatic that my response, the response of people like me, is going to be different. The response to Diwali is going to be different from people who are Indian. But we can learn to appreciate. So I would expect that the majority, depending on the festival, would belong to a particular ethnic group.
Sure.
And nothing is wrong with that. So that is not the point. But the thing is that it mustn't reach such a disproportion that what you are seeing is another group feeling excluded. And I think that's the stage we are at now. That you are seeing such an extreme disproportion that you get the sense another group is feeling excluded. And we have to look at that and see why is that? Why doesn't another group feel that they can, share in my joy, and come to appreciate my expression? Okay, you're going to get African cultural environment, the aesthetics going to be African and all that, but why can somebody else not appreciate that? I can't pretend to be what I'm not. I shouldn't have to pretend to be what I'm not for somebody else to appreciate, because exactly. I don't want my brother to change his Indian arrival day or his Diwali celebration. As long as he doesn't make it offensive to me, then I must feel comfortable to participate.
Well, talking about participating in various festivals, we see a group of, particularly the Moruga villagers.
Yes.
They want their Columbus Day back. And I mean, we went down there on Emancipation Day when they were also celebrating the arrival of Columbus.
Yeah.
And the guy who has been playing the role of Columbus for decades said, I'm paraphrasing, but I'm pretty sure he said this. He said, to hell with Emancipation, we want back Columbus Day.
Yes, yes.
I mean, how do you feel about that? We see Sterling Belgrove from the Rose Foundation saying, make it a 3-in-1 celebration, make it Emancipation Day, Columbus Day. I mean, how do you feel about that?
Well, Columbus Day is really an irrelevancy when it comes to anything celebratory. It is something that we should think about as a tragic day in our history. I haven't been to Moruga, but I've never read any report that suggests it is seen as something that is tragic. It shows that we have been miseducated. Something as fundamental as that. That was the reason why I say it should be marked as a tragedy is that the coming of Columbus was the beginning of the extermination, the physical extermination of the majority of the indigenous population of Trinidad and Tobago. I don't know how the survivors of that Holocaust feel to see other people pretending to be them and welcoming the killers. How do you feel about that? I mean, anybody with a sense of history, that is offensive to anybody with a sense of history. The other thing is that how do I feel knowing that the coming of Columbus to the Western world also introduced slavery, which became chattel slavery. Because from the enslavement of the indigenous population, then you move to the enslavement of Africans from the continent of Africa. That's what the coming of Columbus signaled. How could you put that on a plane with Emancipation Day?
Some people say that out of every great crisis, you know, there's some success and something. And the birth of our society, we couldn't be celebrating Emancipation Day or Indian Arrival Day if Columbus hadn't come. And that's the argument the Moruga fishermen, well, the Moruga villagers.
But we might have had a better world if that didn't happen. Because you look at the shift that took place in the world then, and what you have had over the last 500 years is that the assumption of that dominance of Europe and its extensions, whether in the Americas, Australia, and so on. But what you have had is the dominance of Europe over other peoples being established. And if you look at the cultures of the world and the kind of spirit of humanism that dominated other cultures, I don't think that was a good thing for the world.
Right.
And it has really corroded and corrupted other cultures around the world. And all of us have lost some of our humanism as a result of that dominance which was established. And there's been untold human suffering which continues as a result of that. So to me, it is not having a true sense of history to say we couldn't celebrate this, we couldn't celebrate that. The fact we can commemorate emancipation is because you had hundreds of years of enslavement of African people, and there's no joy in that. You've had the murder of millions of the peoples who were native to these lands from here right through the Americas. I mean, real slaughter took place as a result of that. And I cannot see the Jews, as a result of the Holocaust, you now have Israel. Because everybody said, oh, we had to give the Jews a homeland, and they went and displaced another population and created an Israel. So the Jews can celebrate an Israel today as a result of the Holocaust. But you're not going to see them celebrate the Holocaust.
Right.
They never let us forget it. Never let us forget the tragedy of that period.
Sure.
And you could hardly go and see a film that doesn't refer to it even in some oblique way. It doesn't have to be a film on the Holocaust. It could be a love picture. And somebody's going through trauma.
Yeah.
Why is that trauma? Because they have some memory of this. You know, they inject it into everything. Yeah. And none of it is injected as, oh, could celebrate this now. No, we celebrate Israel. But we don't celebrate the Holocaust that led to the formation of Israel.
We have just a couple more minutes, but I want to talk about the efforts to have an Emancipation Park named, or King George V Park renamed Emancipation Park. Now, I remember in 1999 or thereabouts when Pastor Pandey was Prime Minister, and he spoke at the Emancipation Village. And he spoke about renaming even the Lady Young Road, Kwame Ture Drive, or he threw it out as a suggestion and so on. Where are we with that? And we still have all these King George V Park, Lady Young Road. We know Lady Young was no lover of Trinidad and Tobago.
That's right.
And we have all these names associated with our colonial past. Where are we with that, and do you expect for an Emancipation Park, a permanent home to be named, to be given?
Yes, well, and I want to make a distinction between the Emancipation Park, which would be a place of memory and reflection, and something like a permanent Emancipation Village. Okay, because the Emancipation Park, where we have identified King George V Park, will not facilitate. You can't really hold like emancipation celebrations there. It's too small.
Okay.
Right, for one thing. The other thing is that you don't want to build up large permanent structures in that space.
Yes.
In fact, it shouldn't even have the car park that it has now. You know, which is a peculiar thing that people were saying they don't want to lose any green space, but they have lost so much of it to a car park where there's no grass again, it's graveled and all that. But that's one of the things that tells you the dynamics and how people think about things that are African rooted. So the Emancipation Park and the plan which we had, and we worked on devising a layout for the park, because we did a physical layout for the park, and we did it in conjunction with the groups which play sports in the park, or the groups playing sports at the time. We did surveys to see where all the groups played, what part of the ground they used, when they played and all that. And we did a layout that could accommodate everybody so that it could be a living area where those things continue.
Right.
And you could have a space where you would have particular kinds of monuments and so on. So everything was laid out, and we were quite ready to go with it in we have had so many elections, I can't recall the dates now. But you know, there had been some partisan sentiments expressed where the park is concerned. So once the election was coming up, the committee really suspended its work at that point, because we did not want it to be caught up on election platforms, because if it becomes caught up in that way, then people apply their partisan politics as opposed to the national goodwill. And then after that, because of the tie and the elections in the offing and all that, so now we are really calling on the government to let's get this committee going again and complete this process.
Okay, sorry to interrupt you, but we've run out of time. Thanks so much, Khafra Kambon, Chairman of the Emancipation Support Committee.
All right.
Speaking with us right here on One on One, I'm Nirad Tewarie. Thank you for joining us. We'll be here tomorrow, same time, same place. Until then, take good care and stay tuned to IETV.